We thought it was over. We thought it was done. The CMA and the FTC are trying to end the fun. Yesterday, a mere 24 hours ago, the FTC lost its court battle to stop Microsoft from making its largest acquisition of Activision, nearly $70 billion dues, and it seemed like things were starting to go downhill and that the drama was going to be coming to an end, and that Microsoft next week would carry a novelty-sized check down to Activision and hand over the money. That was the dream, and that was the reality for a mere 12 hours, because at that point, information came out almost immediately after that the CMA and Microsoft were going to work things out. But this morning, we woke up and realized, maybe that's not true, and there's still a lot to be going on, and I guarantee a lot of people up in Redmond, which is Microsoft's headquarters, are sitting on pins and needles right now, trying to figure out what's going on. So after the ruling yesterday, Microsoft's Brad Smith put out this statement. He said, after today's court decision in the US, our focus now turns back to the UK, where we ultimately disagree with the CMA's concerns. We are considering how the transaction might be modified in order to address those concerns in a way that is acceptable to the CMA. In order to prioritize these work on these proposals, Microsoft and Activision have agreed with the CMA that a stay of the litigation in the UK would be in the public interest, and the parties have made a joint submission to the Competition Appeal Tribunal to this effect. Keyword being there, they made a submission. Now, while all this was going on, actually over on CNBC, David Faber reported that Microsoft and basically the CMA had come to an agreement and that the litigation would be put on hold and all that. Well, as it turns out, that doesn't necessarily seem to be holistically accurate, or maybe some things got misinterpreted because of what kind of came out after that is that the CMA is effectively leaning towards, okay, well, just because this deal is done does not mean that the CMA is happy. And so the competition market authorities, the CMA in the UK, basically said, okay, like if you want to make this proposal, that is fine, but then we may have to completely redo our review of this transaction. And that's where things started to go off the rails. As a reminder, by July 18th, Microsoft has to have this done. Otherwise, they are contractually obligated, unless they redo the terms, to pay Activision $3 billion as a part of a breakup fee. So when you hear the words like have to redo our review of this process, and it's like, oh boy, there's no way they're going to get that done in 6 days. And here we are yet again with the CMA holding things up. Now, we'll get to what Microsoft could potentially do in the UK. But at this point right now, the CMA is not folding. Initially, the headlines were coming out. It's like, hey, the CMA is just going to be like, okay, the CMA is like, okay, we were wrong. We're going to do this and we'll just kind of work through things. But this morning, it does not feel like the CMA is actually following that route. Now, on the more probably serious side, on the FTC side, this is where things get a little bit more dicey, because typically when the FTC would lose an appeal like this, they will not appeal it. However, Bloomberg is reporting, exactly as you can see here on the screen, that the FTC is actually leaning towards appealing the Activision lawsuit, injunction and all that, the loss of the court battle. So how this works is the judge initially imposed a restraining order that Microsoft could not close this deal until the 14th of this week at 11:59 p.m., meaning that nothing can happen except for, okay, so the court case ends, the FTC and Microsoft, for both of their benefits, depending on which side of the coin they ended on, would have a bit of a gap before things were effectively finalized. And so as it stands right now, Bloomberg is hearing that the FTC might actually try to challenge this ruling, which would then mean it would go to the Ninth Circuit, which is where this would drag on. If that happens, so you got to remember, the FTC has to go to the courts and say, this is what we believe. The courts have to say, okay, we'll create a trial, we'll accept the appeal. If all this happens, then there's no way Microsoft is closing before the 18th, and the circus of this battle is going to continue on. Now, you might be wondering, it's like, well, the judge was pretty clear in her ruling that Microsoft had a good case and the FTC did not do a good job. A lot of it revolves around the Switch, was actually a console, and a lot of people, myself included, felt like the FTC focused too much on Sony and the Call of Duty impact rather than the consumer. Remember, the FTC is not there to protect Sony, they're there to protect the consumer in the marketplace competition. And so over on IGN, there's actually a pretty good write-up, which I will link to down in the description, which I recommend you read. But they got varying opinions from other people, and I want to call out this. It says, The judge was very explicit. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, i.e. the appellate court that oversees our district, has not addressed, and I repeat, has not addressed whether this burden shifting framework applies in vertical merger cases. This is a vertical merger that Microsoft is trying to do. She made the best decision she could, relying on a case from an appellate court in Washington, D.C. However, while the D.C. court's ruling can be persuasive, it's not binding in California, meaning that what she used as a foundation for her ruling could not be considered a binding in California. That's a really big deal. So it's possible that the Ninth Circuit could take a different approach and ultimately decide that no, actually, the burden the judge placed on the FTC was too heavy. That is a really big deal. Now, the question becomes one, the first thing that needs to happen is the FTC actually needs to go and say, look, we need another trial at this. We need another stab because, again, what this individual pointed out over on IGN is actually completely factual, right? They don't have domain over California. The burden was too heavy, and bada bing, bada boom, all of a sudden Microsoft's back in court. And as we all know, the wheels of justice do not move swiftly, and there would be zero chance that they would actually get this closed by the 18th. So I think that is actually the specific thing that might hang this up, is if the FTC does try to appeal it. I'm not less concerned that the CMA stuff will delay things, but yeah, let's kind of just keep focusing. And the FTC is carrying the torch right now to see what their next move is. So a couple interesting things that I think are definitely worth pointing out. When Microsoft actually proposed this acquisition back, was it January 2022, Activision, I believe, had around 10,000 employees. As of right now, they have about 17,000. Microsoft has around 220,000 employees. However, they just did a round of layoffs, so that number is likely lower than that. However, they're going to be swelling up if this deal does go through, just to show you how big Microsoft will be post-acquisition. Now, I fully expect that there will be layoffs at Activision. Actually, a lot of people expect Bobby Kotick to be the first one potentially out the door. That being said, right, you don't need a full financial staff. You don't need that whole infrastructure when you have Microsoft on the backside. So there would more than likely be some reductions, which is obviously not a great thing, but hey, they happen literally every time there's an acquisition. There are layoffs, and I fully expect that to happen. So the question becomes, what happens next? Well, there's really like three options or three things to play out. First is nothing happens. FTC does nothing. CMA says, fine, we'll just deal with it. We'll just keep going. And so then by the 18th, actually, I would expect probably over the weekend or maybe Monday, first day of business of next week, the transaction will in fact close. Keep in mind, Microsoft has earnings reporting on July 25th. This should hopefully would be all wrapped up by that point. Will it happen? We don't quite know. So that is the first thing. The second thing is that the FTC does file for an emergency injunction with the Ninth Circuit Court, and then this thing just goes off the rails. At that point, there's effectively two decisions. Activision has a decision to make, like, hey, are we going to go through with this? If they want to do that, then they can renegotiate with Microsoft, try to extend this, and that is something they can do. Or they can be like, nope, we're not going to do it. I suspect that they would, because Activision's stock price was way below the $90-ish threshold. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was in the 90s that Microsoft would be paying. And so they'd be losing a pretty premium to do all that. And so it's in their best shareholder interest at the end of the day to fight this. So that is it. The third option is like, what happens with the CMA? So the FTC doesn't do anything, right? And then the CMA is like, we're going to buckle down. I suspect that Microsoft would just try to steamroll the UK market and try to just blast this thing through. Yeah, it's not always like, it's complicated because people are saying, just stop selling Xbox. Well, Microsoft's a big company. They have Windows, they have cloud services, they have Office. The CMA could, in theory, harm Microsoft in other ways other than just like, okay, just don't sell Call of Duty here. Like that is, there's a lot of complexity to it because Microsoft is so large at the end of the day, and they're a multinational company, and they can't just ignore the CMA. I suspect, though, that they would just really blast this thing through and then kind of deal with the ramifications in the back end only in that locality, because at the end of the day, they're approved in the EU, they're approved in the US, they're approved in all their major markets. And Microsoft would, I think, try to strong arm all of this. The reality is we should know real quickly how this thing is going to play out, right? The FTC has until effectively end of day, Friday of this week, to get its ducks in a row, whether or not it's going to do anything. Right now, all we have is the Bloomberg report that says, yes, they are considering this. But again, until the paperwork is filed, until the documentation goes out, all we can do is just say, like, look, Bloomberg is not a fly-by-night publication. They typically try to do pretty good. And so I would tend to believe that this is well-sourced information if you're going to run a headline like that in the biggest FTC trial of recent history at the end of the day. So, yeah, there we go. We'll find out how this shakes out. This is just sort of the update. I thought we were going to start moving on from this, but we are far from done, my friends. And if you want to stay updated on everything else happening and when this finally clears, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because only BS on this channel is me.